Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction, which is the only literary nonprofit that supports the creation and enjoyment of fiction. Tonight is going to be a great craft talk, and make sure you sign up for our mailing list. Our spring writing workshops will go live on Friday, so if you're interested in learning more about the craft of writing and want to take a class here, there's going to be a bunch of um, classes that you can choose from, including one by one of our panelists tonight, Don Raffel. How many of you have ever taken a workshop at the Center for Fiction, out of curiosity? Okay, a few of you. How many of you have been here before? Okay, well, welcome back, and welcome to those of you who are joining us on the live stream. And if you've never been here before, please come back. This is a great home for readers and writers. A few housekeeping announcements this evening. We will have an audience Q&A, and if you're here, please raise your hand and somebody will come to you with a microphone so that the people who are watching on the live stream can hear you. And if you're on the live stream, you may type your question in the chat at any time and we'll read it for you before the end of the evening. When the event is over, you can go over to the bookstore to purchase books and then come back here to get it signed and personalized. I think that's it. So now let me introduce our wonderful panel. Ken Chinquee grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin, served in the medical field in the Air Force, and is often referred to as the queen of flash fiction. She's published hundreds of pieces of fiction and nonfiction in journals and magazines, including The Nation, Plowshares, Noon, Story Quarterly, Denver Quarterly, Fiction, and many, many others, all the best. She's senior editor of New World Writing, chief editor of Elm Leaves Journal, and co-director of SUNY Buffalo State Writing Major. She's the author of 8 books, most recently her debut novel, Pipette. She's joined with Eugene Lim, the author of the novel Fog and Car, The Strangers, Dear Cyborgs, and Search History. His writings have appeared in The New Yorker, The Believer, The Baffler, Granta, and many others. Let's see, many, many others. Pessimist of the intellect by night. By day, he's house librarian at the Charles Xavier School for the Greatly Responsible. He runs Ellipsis Press and lives in Jackson Heights, New York. And Don Raffel is the author of 6 books, most recently Boundless as the Sky, a story collection filled with aviators, sword swallowers, impossible cities, and more. Her writing has appeared in Oh, the Oprah Magazine, Bomb, The New Philosopher, Conjunctions, Big Other, and many others. She's currently the fiction editor at Northwest Review and works as an independent editor and teacher. Please welcome them all to the stage.
Turning on my mic. Thank you. Oh, it's really fun to be here in person, and I love the Center for Fiction. I've been teaching here and doing other things here for a long time, so it's great to be here with Kim and Eugene. So we wanted to get together to talk about flash fiction or very short fiction, whatever term you want to give it. And so I wanted to start with a couple of thoughts about flash, open a conversation, we'll share some work, and then we'll take some questions. So this really very short form is actually not something new. So when you think about really short works, prose, flash, or microfiction as it's called now, Poe was doing it, and so was Mallarmé and Baudelaire and Rimbaud, and many, many other people around the world whose voices probably got lost. And if you want to think about it this way, probably the fairy tales that you loved when you were a child were flash fiction. But it has exploded now, in large part, I would say, because of the internet. All kinds of journals of varying quality of flash. For me, I find this form particularly compelling because I find that composition is really interesting as a writer. And I feel that Flash is paradoxically very concise and also really, really spacious. That it's so short that the language is very precise, the story is very compressed, and yet the reader is challenged and given permission to make all kinds of intuitive leaps. So for me, Flash is something that gives the reader space for the unknown. So I just thought I'd talk to you both a little bit about Kim. You've been writing what's now called Flash for a really long time. In fact, you just told me that the term Flash emerged specifically in 1994. But I can't. It would be hard for me to think of anybody who's been at this longer and more consistently than you have. And one of the things that's really interesting to me about your work is I sometimes feel like you almost have your own genre that's Chinquee. That across many, many books, there's a body of work of Flash that's really interesting. And so can you talk a little bit about how and why you started writing this way and why you do it?
Sure. Well, thank you, and thank you for that great introduction. I'm certainly not the person who started the genre, but I think I fell upon it on a really fortunate time. In 2000, actually 1999, I joined this. I was a student at the Center for Writers in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, studying with Mary Robeson and Frederick Barthelme. And in one particular class, Mary said, "We have nobody scheduled for workshop this day. So how about everybody just come with 5 pages?" And I was like, "Okay, sure." And so I wrote a very short piece which I called "The Gold Chain" or something like that. And she actually really liked it, and then we revised it. It's called "The Top Shelf," and then actually I sent it to Diane Williams at noon, and she accepted it. And wow, so that was the first time I was published in Noon in 2002. And when Diane called me, she said, "I want to know how did you write this piece?" And it was a Mary Robeson's workshop. So it did really well, and I continued to write flash fiction, just kind of working with some really great mentors. I just continued to write it, and that's kind of how it started. And a lot of times, when I write flash fiction now, it's more of a failed attempt to write longer stories.
No, but what I'm saying is that you've never used Flash as okay, this is practice or something else. It's an art form in itself, which I think it sometimes gets mistaken. And with Pipette, which is your novel, it's really a novel in Flash. It's these pieces, and so what I find really interesting that's happening with Flash now is not just individual very short pieces, which seem to correspond nicely with our shortened attention span, but also the really interesting ways that these short pieces are put together to make something longer. These shorter fragmentary pieces bump up against each other and refract off of one another to build something that's longer in a way that makes new connections. And I saw, I was really interested in your choice of you did that now with this novel after many collections of short fictions.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think a lot of my work consists of constructing what I see day to day. I use prompt words, and I use them in my I host an online writing workshop, and I have prompt words, and it's like visioning things that I take from everyday life and piecing them together, and it helps me to see the world in profound ways, and it makes me feel more alive. But I feel like seeing these, as I'm crafting, I'm seeing the world, and I don't think of it as this whole big scheme of an idea, but it's those small things that I can construct. Maybe I'm just going to write a one paragraph story today.
Right, and we'll see that with some of what you read
Yeah.
later. But Kim is unbelievably prolific, unlike me, who is unbelievably unprolific.
You're too generous.
You were saying beforehand that you were writing a story a day.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean they're all good. And I'm getting rejections, so that comes with the practice. You're gonna get rejected. Not every piece is gonna be gold. Not every piece is gonna shine. But even if with a rejection, you can go back and you can go, okay, this is how this needs to be refined. And that to me is like I'm still shining every piece. Even if I'm writing it, sending it out, getting rejected, I'm still refining it. And that's every piece, as I piece them together, becomes part of a bigger whole. And that's the joy of flash fiction, and that's the joy of making a collection of flash fictions that I feel finally, when I put them out into the world, that I can be okay with. So thank you for that.
Yeah. So Eugene, because you originally said, well, you don't necessarily think of yourself as a flash fiction writer, although you had a brilliant flash fiction in the New Yorker, so I think that qualifies you. But Search History, your most recent novel, is made up of more fragmentary pieces than you would see in a traditional novel. You're really asking the reader to make different connections, and the title, I love the title because it's kind of a, like, is search history, is search an adjective, like search history on your computer, or is it a directive and a verb, like search history? But it sort of, the structure of this book with these more fragmentary pieces kind of echoes the way we intuitively search for one thing after another online, as if somehow our very brains have been rewired in a kind of flash way by our daily use of the internet. So the Wall Street Journal described search history as nested, splitting, and converging stories. The fragmentary, asynchronous nature of search history has roots in the avant-garde, but also calls to mind the uncanny processes of artificial intelligence, which forge inexplicable connections and operate through weird skips in logic. So, I mean, can you talk a little bit about your choices and the way you use those fragmentary pieces?
Sure. Thank you, Don, for including me. I don't feel like I'm a practitioner of the flash fiction or the prose poem or the short, as much as these two fine, excellent practitioners of that. But I think I felt a connection because I do think about form a lot. And I thought about different ways I could respond to this. And I have a pet theory. It's a little bit off the wall that I wanted to throw out there because I can't. And it has to do with the duration of these artworks in relation to how we take in and how we perceive and how we think, actually. There was a book you might have heard of in 2011 called Thinking Fast or Slow by a psychologist who actually won the Nobel Prize in economics because probably because he proved we're not all rational consumers as we'd like to think. But he wrote this book, Thinking Fast or Slow, which maybe some of you have heard of. And this is a popular nonfiction book, but fairly dense, where he proposes two systems, two ways that we perceive the world. One is instinctive and emotional and almost unconscious, and the other one is more deliberate and more, quote, logical. And these two systems he gave with the rather unpoetic name System 1 and System 2. But, and what does that have to, and System 1, an example, would be like the answer to the question 2 + 2. You don't even have to think about it, it's immediate. Or your your feeling of disgust when you see something disgusting. You don't have to think about it, it's immediate. And System 2 is more deliberate. You're thinking, you're doing your taxes, or your parallel parking, or those are things where you have to use more of your mind. What does this have to do with literature? Well, I think there are different durations of seeing art. A painting you see in an instant. And a novel by Dostoevsky, it'll take you several hours or days, weeks to read. So these are different durations of time. And I think the closer you get to that painting, even if you look at a painting for hours, you're getting it in instants of perception. And I thought that the idea of the short or the prose poem or the poem, it's actually closer to this system one, this idea of instinctual or emotional or the instant of thought. And why I think that was, so I think it helps, this pet theory of mine, I think may help us distinguish some of the elements of this short prose or of prose poetry. And one thing that sprang to mind when I thought about this is the old chestnut by Allen Ginsberg, first thought, best thought. And that thought is a provocation by Ginsberg that seems to still persist. People still think about, what does first thought, best thought mean? And it's not true, obviously. Your first thought is often a terrible thought. But so why does this idea seem so compelling or seem to keep in the dialogue? And part of it is because it's not really your first thought is your best thought, but you could rewrite it to say, write a poem that honors the instance of perception. And so therefore your first thought is not your best thought, but you're trying to write something that is like that instant of perception, that first thought. And so I think the building of these prose works, these shorter prose works, especially because they come in this shorter duration, I think are closer to that impulse. And then you asked to talk a little bit about search history. The idea that a technique that I've used in several of the past few novels is a character comes onto stage, so to speak, says a long story, and then someone else comes onto stage and tells a longer or short story. And then these different monologues or stories are kind of put together in a string. And for a while I wondered, I have a justification of why that is, that I often tell. And then I thought about it after a while, and I have a second answer, which is probably more truthful, and maybe I'll say later. But the first answer is that so how can a novel sustain all these different worlds that we go through, these different universes that are sitting right next to each other? But the truth is, we do it all the time. We live in a world that is like this. You wake up, you listen to a story on the radio, on the commute to work, you might read a New Yorker story or a short story, and then you come home and you watch a science fiction novel, or you watch a cartoon with your child, or even whatever you're reading. We're picking up, putting down narratives constantly. We live in the proliferation of narrative. And we don't have to start at the beginning and we don't end at the end. We just go in and out of them all the time. And it's not necessarily something that we're even aware of. We swim in an ocean of narrative. And so I think that's another reason why this idea of different fragmentations can work. And then how you get it to be a cohesive whole is a different kind of craft question. It's a question of aligning themes and making the glue between the universes make sense. So those are roughly some ideas.
Yeah. So that's interesting because in Boundless as the Sky is historical fiction, the novella. And I chose to do, it's very, like, I have boxes and boxes and boxes of research for Boundless as the Sky, which is the book is a diptych. There's two parts. And the first part is actually short stories that are a response to Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. And these cities, this part of the book deliberately refutes chronology, and some of the cities are fantastical and refute specific ideas of place, and yet they're tied together in a certain way. So you're making those leaps. The second part is very, very specifically, it takes place on July 15th, 1933, which was a historical event in Chicago. There was a World's Fair, and Mussolini flew in his flying armada of goodwill in the form of 24 fascist seaplanes that landed in Chicago. This is true. And I really wanted to tell the historical story as flash because When I've done research, and I've also written narrative nonfiction, I've really realized just how fractured our understanding of history is. That when you go to search history, something that happened in the past, it's full of holes. It's full of things that were unrecorded moments. It's full of points of view and voices that were never heard or recorded. And every possible eyewitness had a different point of view. And so I felt like the best way to try to begin to understand it was with these kind of kaleidoscopic flash, where it's almost like a kaleidoscope where these different points of view refract off one another, and you start to see what this picture looks like that took place on just this one day.
The other thing I think is that time by necessity works very different in a short.
Yeah.
In a longer work, you have the illusion of, quote, real time. Like, you have the illusion that someone sits down and tells you a story, or that you live through the time of the work. In a short piece, longer pieces can be more fragmented, but in a short piece, you have to, time is either not a factor, or like you're saying, it's a kaleidoscope. It's a use of moments, and it's not, almost by necessity, it can't produce the quote verisimilitude of passing time. It has to be in some way more compressed.
So time is flying, and I wanted to have a chance for everybody to actually read a little work so we can start to hear, what we're talking about. So, Kim, do you want to share something?
Sure.
Some thoughts about it.
Along this line, I'm really glad that we're having this discussion about time.
Yeah.
Because I was actually literally walking on the Brooklyn Bridge today with my dog, and in my headphones, I was listening to the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan, and coincidentally, the character was walking between the Manhattan Bridge and the Brooklyn Bridge as I was walking.
Kismet,
yes. So I'm actually going to start with a piece that I wrote before COVID, and this is the start of my novel Pipette, and it starts at the ballerina, at the ballet in Times Square, not Times Square, but a place at the Y near Central Park, where it's called the Circle, yes. Ballerina. At the ballet, a strong man carries with grace his ballerina. They're beautiful in their green and white tights, deep pirouettes. I have dreams of pipetting in the heavens, and when I wake, the bed is small and hard. The walls are cinder. I am at the Y. I sleep in the same clothes I wore on the train over. I get back on the train. It's a long way home. The man in blue continues to be the man in blue. The men in blue take tickets. The train stops. It makes a whistle. The horn whistles and rolls. I pet as many as I can. It's not like my dogs are not okay, but it's not like having children. My son is an adult now, with dogs and a wife. I was staying at the Y near Central Park and spent a good deal of my time with men. We brushed our teeth in the same sink. We bathed using the same water. We sometimes relieved ourselves without shutting the doors. I also petted as many dogs and leashes as I could. All the dogs seemed very interested in me. I drive my car an hour after the train ride. When I get to the door, the dogs greet me, helicoptering me around. I guess I'm just kind of a dog lady. Buzz cut. I wake from another dream of being lost. I leave my bike somewhere but can't find it. The landscape has turned itself around. Everyone else seems to know where they are, watching a game, keeping score, and I'm on my own, sweating up a hill, daffodils waiting. It's a raining morning. I open the curtains. The dogs beg at my feet. It's past 9 a.m. I go to the front porch, collecting the Sunday paper. Throughout the day, the dream stays with me. It brings on memories of other dreams. Not able to find my car, missing flights, losing my phone, losing my wallet, losing my connections. I look into the mirror, pluck my brows, I study my jawline. I put my hands over my head. Everything's smooth now. That's after I shave my head.
You just take something that are just the small moments of everyday life and you somehow make them transcendent with that.
It's fiction.
I know, but
I actually did shave my head.
But they're small. It's like you find the significance in these small moments that just begin to share.
Thank you.
I should read? You want me to keep it short or?
We're talking and talking. And
Okay.
I'm not looking at that. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. This is a short piece. I don't know if it's a flash, but it's a short piece, and it's a piece of advice. It's called French Exit. You may use this piece of advice later tonight. This is how you leave a party without saying goodbye, also known with different connotations as the gypsy fade, the Irish leave, or filet à l'anglaise. It's easy. It's like Alan Carr's The Easy Way to Stop Smoking. You can't give a summary for enchantment, but here's my paraphrase of Carr's method. Stop smoking. The Talking Heads have a song called Heaven, in which David Byrne sings, "There is a party, everyone is there, everyone will leave at exactly the same time." David Byrne knows there is no heaven. You can hear it in the song. There is an equal and opposite force to the French leave. It's FOMO. More directly, in a purely logical sense, the equal and opposite force is the fear of being rude, of not following etiquette or protocol. But more truthfully, if less directly, that is more via the sense of poetry, it's the fear of missing out. No one but you cares that much if you stay or if you go. You've already made eye contact, that's the important thing. But something within feels that's too light an imprint. So you must make your presence confirmed, haloed, by announcing its end, or else maybe you weren't there. And then maybe you won't be invited to the next party. This whole thing might be about Instagram. Sometimes people die without saying goodbye. That is something completely fucking different from what I'm talking about. I'm talking about leaving social occasions, about leaving a party. Life is not a party. There are variants where you say goodbye without saying goodbye. If you're on the same wavelength as someone, not saying goodbye is the best. It means you're always connected. Parents of small children usually take a French leave from gatherings at the playground. This is because little children are egotistical monsters and parents are their servants. This is acceptable because we all began as such monsters. The lesson here is that you too can take a French leave because you too are the servant to a monster. Which one? There are also numbers involved. The smaller the party, the more difficult the French exit. It's not necessarily more difficult to enact, but the key component is not the act of leaving without saying goodbye, but rather making the goodbye meaningless. The hardest part is gathering your stuff. After that, leave directly. That's all there is to it. Oh, but there's your expression. Don't look panicked or excited, certainly not guilty. Emulate your waiting room resting face as it scans baking recipes in Entertainment Weekly. The general aim of all this is a faint, fading question in the backs of the minds of those who are left behind. If your departure raises a persistent or growing question, then you fucked it up. I take back what I said about it being easy. It's pretty hard. It's as hard as Alan Carr's The Easy Way to Stop Smoking. Mm-hmm.
to just read a tiny bit from parts of this book to try to show how it fits together. And then I ask you to read again. I'm bad at managing time. This is time is my bear. Time is my bear. That's right. Yeah. So as my I decided to do my about the author for my book as a flash fiction. So this is the author. She covered her face. She tore the damp stuffing out of the past and filled her fists with synonyms, flung words like confetti, like fairy tale feathers, repeating herself again and again. She believed in this way she could bring back the dead, if just this once. This is one of the cities from the first part. This is called the beautiful city of Serena, and I actually did write this before the pandemic. In the beautiful city of Serena, every old woman wears a mask. The body may yet appear lithe in slacks and silks, in exquisitely calculated jackets, the gait still steady in the cleverest shoes. The hair is calibrated to perfection, dyed, snipped, and yet the face cannot be made to please the eye, not by needle, by knife, nor emollient, unguent, pressure, laser, poison, or paint. And so the old women go about in vivid masks, the poor in the primary colors, the wealthy in the jewel tones, garnet and sapphire, emerald, all of it fired in the city's famous ovens. Feathers may be added for effect. Time was the old women removed their masks at night in the dark, but now it is the law that they must wear them even to sleep, even to dream. The hands must be gloved, the toes must be sheathed. The old women may be 60 or 90 or 210. Despite their wild hues, no one sees them at all. And so throughout this, part of the glue is feathers and flight and birds. And for the historical part, which takes place on a single day, I wanted to use flash to tell the stories of some of the people whose histories you wouldn't normally see. And these include the freak show performers who were on the ground at the World's Fair that day. And we usually kind of look away or, erase that. And this is based on a real person, and I'm just going to read part of it. This is, in my book, I call her Dodo, the bird girl. In real life, her name was Minnie Woolsey. She went by Cuckoo, the bird girl, and she was very nearly blind and had a bird-like appearance and was a freak show performer. She feels herself fly in the first few moments of waking, the wind on her face, her thin limbs, her few tufts of hair, as if the sky can hold her, lift her, carry her, and love her as nobody does. She has never seen herself, her reflection, and why would she need to? People have said what she looks like all her life. The world is light and form and shadow, a little bit of color, the warmth of the sun, the relief of the rain, the sweet and salty taste of food. Her face, she is told, looks enough like a bird, but people will pay good money to look. She has never seen a bird. She has learned how to dress in a costume of feathers, how to strut and how to cluck, so they will laugh and then clap and then come back again and bring friends. Still, she doesn't mind it too much. Not like the place where she came from, with no light of day and no one to talk to and no one to listen. Just everyday moaning and screaming down the hall, and hunger from eating nothing but mush and some of it rancid, and her arms tied down and her body cut open so she'd never have a baby, and the scars she could feel with her fingers that were jagged. The man in the night who did what he wanted, crushing her limbs, spilling her blood, spitting out names she will not repeat, not even in her mind. All of them believed she was incapable of speech. because she never spoke in there. She wanted to die. And then she was summoned, taken. His voice was smooth. He had observed her, he said, and he had chosen her. She was worth money. Um, Kim, I want to let you read just a little bit more.
I can
like
read
to.
one more piece, I
Yeah.
think, and then I guess
And
we're
then
going to
we'll take
open it.
questions,
Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah.
sure, I can read one final piece. This is towards the end of the book, so I don't want to give spoilers, but I mean, who cares? This actually won a Pushcart Prize this year, so I was actually
Yeah, I've lost track of how many you've won. How many have you won?
only three.
Only three.
It's three,
Only
but
three.
I mean,
Okay.
there are people who won. I mean, this piece was actually I don't know. I'll just read it and see. This was published in Post Road, and it's actually end of the book in sequentially, but it was actually meant to be published in the first part of the book. And I think we were going to talk, like maybe we'll talk about this in the Q&A about how we constructed our books. But
When you say meant to be in the first part but ended up in the end, you mean by yourself, though, because of revision?
yeah, like time-wise, sequentially. I mean, it was meant to be put in the beginning of the book, but after I decided this was a novel, we revised it. So yeah, this is called. It's a very, very short piece. It's actually, I'm not sure if it's a prose poem or if it's a flash fiction. So it's called How Do You Roll? Things I love about my new home. Having a full spread on the bed if I want. Bright colors, lighting candles. The whir of transit buses passing. Keeping my life clean. Being organized. Being able just to find things. Eating meals at the table. Not always having the TV on. Being close to Wegmans. Cooking for myself. Doing my own laundry. Enjoying my art, my plants, my dogs. Long soaks in the bathtub. Taking in my salts. Lavender oils. Lights down with a lit candle and low music. Practicing self-care. Knowing where my clothes are. Being able to exercise whenever and in whatever ways I want. Drinking wine with dinner. My nice big kitchen. Cooking vegan, cooking non-vegan, or not cooking at all. Making my own plate. Not having to hear bad things about liberals. Being liberal. Writing at my desk. Reading. Being quiet. Feeling cleansed. Asking my dogs, how do you roll? Walks to my favorite park where I can fly a kite if I want. Being in awe of the enormous sky I can see clearly out my window. The pandemonium it makes when a storm breaks. Making a lime into a kickball. Acting like a whimbrel or a warbler or a goose. Being silly with myself. Playing imaginary golf while playing an imaginary trumpet, eating imaginary or real blueberry sherbet in my fluffy velvet robe. Oh, how scrumptious. My place smells so delicious. Can you study my serology? Can you tell that I am free now? Thanks for that indulgence.
Story is list.
Yeah, list.
Instances of gratitude and instances of faith.
I want to ask you each one more question, and then we'll open this up. But for both of you, Kim, you mentioned moving it around, but Eugene, also you talked about these different. Did you spend a lot of time moving the different pieces around once you had them?
No, usually I don't. Sometimes I do, but I didn't often, I once read that Louis Zukowski writes this way, or did write this way, where he writes and he can't go forward except for, he has to write basically in order. And it took me, and I thought about that for a while. I don't know why I bring it up, but I thought about that for a while and what it means. But I am similar largely. Like, if it gets rearranged, then I think because they're units that are put together, that if you start rearranging, then you have to kind of fiddle inside to make it work. So I generally go in order.
I have to say likewise. I mean, this is probably the only piece that I moved way back. Most of the other pieces are sequential. I mean, this book was originally supposed to be published as short stories, but once I approached the editor or the publisher, and I'm like, it's a novel. But this is one of the pieces that I have to move back because for the sort of narrative arc, it didn't work having it earlier. I love moving things around in shorter form.
But it's just, like I say, I feel like this is it's in a small space, you actually have so much space because you have an opening for the reader and you have a place of discovery and you have a place where with those connections, you're allowing the reader space to make their own connections, to make their own decisions, to what you're really trying to do. And when I teach this, I say really what you're trying to do is not transfer a feeling, but evoke a feeling. Not explain a feeling, but transfer a feeling. So you just really want to have the reader feel.
The teacher once said to me, I think non-writers or maybe beginning writers think the act of writing is moving something from here to the page. But in actual fact, writing happens, this was a quote I think from Raymond Roussel, where the nib of the pen touches the page, or where the pads of your fingers touch the keyboard. It's really there that the writing is done. It's not it's not a thing of transference. It's you're in the moment.
Yeah. And it's also, for those of you who are writers, it's my prescription for writer's block to everybody because it allows you to take a risk. And oftentimes we get very wound up, like the idea of starting something longer is just overwhelming. And so when I teach, I ask writers, I always assign them to do a short piece. I give them 500 words, and somehow it very often frees something in people because you can't really get anywhere without failing. And if you fail in 500 words, who cares? Like if you're trying to learn something new, failure is part of the process. So.
And to touch upon that, just a detail on that, I think that's how I started an online writing group back in 2002, and it was just 5 words. Here are 5 words. We're gonna write a piece a day, and I think I see some people here who were part of that group, Susan. And it was just, it doesn't matter if we publish this, it's just a piece that we're gonna put out there, and I'm still like, that's what's keeping me going today. It's been 22 years, so, it's just part of, it's like putting gas in your car.
And when I started writing, I was working full-time and I had 2 children and I had a very demanding job, and I also realized I'm not actually going to have the kind of life where you have total silence for miles around and infinite amounts of time. I'm going to have to work with the spaces that I have. And somebody early on said to me, you kind of write like it's 3 in the morning and you have a fever. And I felt like, well, yeah. So we'll open up to questions. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I think somebody's bringing you a mic.
So this relates to what you've been discussing about the order. So my question is this: so Dawn, I just opened your book for the first time, and I had the feeling that I could sort of dip in any place, almost as if I were opening a book of poems. So if I were to do that, do I miss your intention?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I obsess over the sequencing, and it is actually sequential. So if I find out that you're doing that, I will come to your
I-
house and make trouble.
You know what I often think about sequence or this or it's so you have your units, your bits, and there's a good metaphor I think in collage making, because when you make a collage, the masters of collage, you are working with ideas of rhythm and balance and general composition, and so you make arrangements. I think with this, even though you've kind of sculpted these jeweled pieces or these shorter pieces, arranging them in a canvas or in a sequence is a matter of these ideas of repetition and balance and development.
Along that line with your book, when I think of collage, one of my favorite, besides your book, of course, The Heart of the Country by William Gass. One of my favorite collage books. If you look at setting, if you haven't read that book, collage, I see the intention of it, and
Yeah, sequencing is kind of an obsession for me.
and you're really good at that because
Well, it's because I obsess over it. If I am to the extent that I am, I spend a lot of time on it. That's a great question because I know a lot of people don't read.
I have a question about your writing process. So Hemingway is famous for his iceberg theory of storytelling. The idea being that 90% of the story is unrevealed, and the 10% that you tell is just the tip of the iceberg. So I was wondering, what's your process for deciding what to say and also what not to say, as you're thinking about you're taking maybe a big idea that you have or an experience you have, and then trying to put it in a very condensed form.
Well, I can start with that. I think the thing is you don't start with a big idea, and that's why I have prompt words. Because I'm just like, as I start with the small, and that's why I have prompt words. Because if I have 5 words, and it might be things that I saw throughout the day, I'm like, and here's a orange, an ear, and something I smelled, like a eucalyptus. If I can piece those things together, because the bigger world is always going to come compounding on you. If you can start with the small and all the sensory details come down, because that's what they do for me, because the world is just enormous. And the big ideas are going to seep through no matter what. And
I think when you were asking that question, I thought, I don't know if I ever think about what I don't want to say. I guess I do sometimes, but I think the majority of the time is thinking about, well, what do I do want to say? What?
Yeah, and I find it through the composition. So often I'm not even sure what it is I'm writing toward until I start putting words on the page. And so it's almost like the idea comes out of the actual composition itself.
yeah.
Sometimes you'll go back and read, I don't know if this is true for you all, but you'll go back and you read your own work, maybe from years ago, and you go, oh, that's what I was feeling then.
Yeah.
Right? It reveals itself to you.
Yeah, or sometimes I just wrote something out, like, I didn't want to write about that, but suddenly I'm like, oh, I gotta go there, because the truth is just kind of, sometimes I write about things I don't want to write about, but they just end up appearing, and then I'm crying. So.
Well, that's what I think a lot of writer's block is, though. It's like, writer's block is sometimes it's fear of what is going to come out on the page, because you are going to learn things about yourself. If you're writing well and you're being honest about it, you will learn things about yourself, and they might not necessarily be things you wanted to know.
So the answer to his question is you have no control either which way.
I love dreams. Like, sometimes you dream about stuff, and that's fodder. Like, his dreams are crazy as hell. but if you remember your dreams, I'm like, I'm writing that down because it's like a gift. I didn't have to think about it, and it's stuff meshing against each other, and it's just out there. And I mean, I kind of think it's cheating, but I've had stuff published because your mind is. I've written stories in my dreams, and it doesn't mean I'm a great writer, but I'm like, I'm gonna just use it. But just use whatever you can, because there's weird shit happening in our brains all the time, even when we're sleeping. So.
There's a question here.
I ask this to all three of you. I'd like to know, is there a particular flash fiction piece that you've read that has stuck with you like over the years? Even if you read it like last week and it stuck with you particularly.
I printed one out because I thought maybe there'd be opportunity to read it. It is, and I think I did anyway. And it won't take long. Oh, maybe I didn't. It is a Kafka short. I didn't write it down. I thought I did. But it's called The Next Village. Oh, I wish I had written it down. It's like a paragraph, The Next Village, and some, I won't butcher it. You can look it up. The Next Village by Kafka.
Well, I think a cliche sort of flash is Hemingway's.
I was going to say,
Yeah. What was that? For sale.
For sale,
baby shoes never worn.
See, we both can recite it, but it stays with you. But yeah, I don't know. And then, so other than that, what would you say? Another one.
Well,
There's something that I recite to myself almost on a daily basis, and I thought it was a Lydia Davis short story title, but then I tried to look for it, and I think it is just an idea that's buried in one of the stories, and the title is, that I thought it was, which is not, is Frustration-Free Packaging. And she talks about it sometimes, but almost on a daily basis, usually for reasons that are obvious, I think about Lydia Davis's story that she did not write called Frustration-Free Packaging.
Well, when I was writing a lot of, when I first started writing a lot of flash, I read a lot of Lydia Davis's Break It Down, the story collection, and I still refer to it a lot. So I can't name one story in particular, but I go back to that collection a lot.
Definitely Lydia Davis and Italo Calvino, where, in addition to Invisible Cities, is the tales, his folk tales.
And Kawabata, Palm in the Hand stories. That was Japanese. Before flash fiction had a term. The classic Palm in the Hand stories is just a go-to.
Hi, I have a quick question, but I want to know, how did you guys, before you first published, how did you gain the confidence to release your work for others to read?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. My question was, before you first published, how did you gain the confidence to publish like your writings for people to read? Unless you guys already had that confidence before.
Well, one of the things that helped me gain confidence was publishing. Like the first flash story I ever wrote was in Mary Robison's class, and I sent it to Noon, and she accepted it. So I was floored. She called me and she's like, "I want to publish this story," and I was like, so I was sending out a lot. I had 200 things out at a time, and this is when you had to put stamps on things, and I was poor. I was a graduate student and a single mom, so I would go to the post office and buy $35 worth of stamps, and I would buy paper, I would buy ink, and I spent more money on sending things out than I did probably on feeding my child. No, that's a joke. So, but that was my priority. And when I got a phone call from Diane Williams and she said, I want to publish your story, I said, I'm going to keep doing it. And I quit a job. I was a medical technologist. And I did that in the Air Force. I quit that job to go to graduate school full time because I wanted to do it, because I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I think you have to have a passion for it. You have to believe in yourself. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it, but I had a backup job. But when I got that phone call from Diane, it changed my life. It gave me hope. It gave me. I said I'm gonna keep doing it, and I kept getting rejections, and I kept sending stuff out. I've been publishing new and every year since. That was 2002. I still get rejections, and I still get just frustrated, but I keep doing it. So it never gets easier. It never, you think it's gonna get easier? It gets harder. But if you really wanna do it, you just keep doing it. And I wouldn't change anything. I love it because I get to do it. So if you really wanna be a writer, you just gotta do it and just be a writer.
Yeah, rejection is part of the process, and the challenge never goes away. But I have to say, for me, anytime something is accepted, then I revise it again. Yeah. It suddenly becomes real to me, and I think, oh no, this is going out in the world, and somebody's going to read it. I better fix this. Even books.
I think it's not only that. I think it's always a combination of confidence and despair or fear. Yeah. But I think that this is what happens, and I bet you it happens to a lot of writers, maybe all of us. You get your submission ready, you hit send, immediately you have regrets. Immediately you want to change something, or immediately, right?
Oh, you're suddenly writing the editor. Oh, sorry. Can you like look at this new version?
New version, right?
So yeah, but just if you really want to do it, just keep.
Along these lines, we have a question from Zoom. Sorry about the audio; it's a little weird tonight. Do you have a checklist before you send your work out? Like, how do you organize your submissions?
Is this for me? How
organize your submissions? I'm not very organized.
I keep a log. I have a log. I still like longhand back from 1999. Submittable helps as much. We were talking about submittable, but because but yeah, you gotta just keep track of them and like checklist, longhand. And sorry, that's not a great answer, but I don't know. You guys see.
I'm not particularly organized with that, so I'm probably not the right person to answer.
I kept some kind of list someplace, and then at some point I switched to a Google Doc, and I thought that was a great innovation, but I realized it's been like a decade where I use the same Google Doc.
Yeah.
And I think about it as, oh, this new thing that I've kept.
Yeah. It's always easier for me to write things down because I know it's right in front of me. With technology, with everything changing, it's like I'm so behind that if I can see it on paper and if I can write it down, then I remember it too. So I don't have a magical answer.
I want rejections for things that I've withdrawn. Have you ever had that? Like I withdraw something and then 6 months later they're rejected.
Yeah, I've had. Yeah.
There are lots of varieties of indignation and rejection that the writers are subject to.
Yeah. I mean, I think as a literary world, I mean, I hope we can all get better with that. But, I mean, we're all editors here too, so I try to be better as an editor. But it's we're all human, and we all should be forgiven at some point. for all of these things because we're all, I think in general, as editors, as writers, we want, our goal is to publish the best work and to be all sort of agents for each other. And at least that's my hope. I mean, and a lot of us are, as editors, are working for free. We do it because we love it. And, we're all just trying to put good work out there and sort of be agents for each other.
All right. Let's give him a big hand. That was wonderful. I feel like this could be part one of many parts of this conversation. So thank you, all three of you, and thank all of you for coming. If you want to continue the conversation, just scoot on out to the bookstore and buy some books, and then I'm going to bring these three out in the cafe area. The bar is still open, so grab a drink and let's talk about flash fiction with each other. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Now I'll have a drink.